So our second speaker today is Heritage Project's research assistant, our blog writer and New Unity congregant David Walter. David's research focus is mainly on the anti-slavery legacy of the Meeting House. Today, though, David is going to talk about one of the famous characters associated with the Newington Green Meeting House, Mary Shelley. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, author of Gothic novel Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, is the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, the two intellectuals who are two of the main characters that set the legacy of the Meeting House in the 18th century. So just after this little preparation, I'll leave you with David Walter on Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus, Cyberpunk, and the dark future of modernity.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I will begin. 10 days giving birth to Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. Mary Wollstonecraft passed away. Her grieving husband, William Godwin, who was now a single parent, held within his arms Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley under her own name, would become the Pythoness who would author a fable of modernity in all its dark sensuality, shock, and beauty. On the 16th of June, 1816, at the Villa Diodati mansion in Switzerland, Mary and Percy Shelley, Lord George Gordon Byron, John William Polidori, and the somewhat obscure Claire Claremont held an opium-fueled symposium where they created characters of central, existential, and elemental horror: the vampire, the senseless Dr. Frankenstein, and his vengeful creature. Frankenstein and his creature remained the most iconic characters in English literature. Mary Shelley nurtured and raised these characters into some of the most famous and earliest forms of anti-heroes in modern science fiction and horror, which became neo-Gothic or cyberpunk in today's popular culture. At the emotional heart of Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus, there were themes in an autobiographical sense of loneliness, anxiety, the pleasure and the tragedy of motherhood, and the angry rejection from her father. She had concern for women's place in society threatened by a world ruled by a chauvinistic and industrialized society based on science and technology and imperial conquest. As one of the few popular but provocative female writers in early to mid-19th century England, Mary B. Shelley at the time had followed in the radical footsteps of her deceased mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Shelley felt threatened by the extinguishing of metaphysical awareness of a divine force of nature in the universe, but was enamored at the same time by the power of technology, science, and industry. Mary Wollstonecraft established the tenets of feminism in pursuit of women's rights and her other radical ideas, which put her at odds with one of the Darwins of 18th century French Enlightenment, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the 18th century Whig conservative and arch-traditionalist Edmund Burke. Her daughter, Mary Shelley, née Wollstonecraft Godwin, however, embraced the Italian medieval philosopher monk Albertus Magnus and the German Renaissance philosophers Paracelsus and Cornelius Agrippa, who were also steeped in the ancient Greek metaphysics of Aristotle, Plato, and the African Roman philosopher Plotinus, the founder of Neo-Platonism. Mary Shelley's novel challenged the notion of Victor Frankenstein as a traditional masculine hero in Western literature whom with all his scientific prowess and his instruments of life could bring about life from lifelessness through his will. Mary Shelley created an anti-hero for the modern industrial age, augmenting himself with technological power and giving himself over to a godlike conceit to possess and violate the essential divinity of nature herself. She has been quoted in Romantic Outlaw's Extraordinary Lives of Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley, written by Charlotte Gordon, to say that there is no such thing as progress. A man setting sail is not a glorious symbol of expansion. Rather, exploration is yet another meaningless action, a futile gesture in a world where all empires decay and die. Excuse me, please. Mary Shelley was not the first to invent the Gothic genre. Traditional Gothic literature dealt with themes of the supernatural, decrepitude, and the deepest memories of the past filled with decadence during the fall of great houses or empires, specifically the destruction of the assumed Roman civilization in Western Europe by the Goths. Horace Walpole was and is still credited for being the literary pioneer who invented the Gothic genre, who, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, based his novel, The Castle of Otranto, published in 1764, on a dream. Unlike Walpole, however, Wollstonecraft Shelley's dream was based on the future, on things to come, where the horrors of the supernatural gave way to the horrors of scientific and technological process driven by a masculine need to expand, conquer, and dominate people and overcome the fundamental laws of nature herself. By the time Mary had published Frankenstein in 1818, the Napoleonic Wars had been over for 3 years. The USA had been an independent nation state since 1776, and the industrialization of metropolitan Britain increased its economy through the power of its steam-based technology. British metropolitan society also saw the emergence of scientific discoveries and the technologies that had the potential to exploit other fundamental forces and reactions in nature, such as electricity. By the time Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley had published her second edition of Frankenstein under her own name in 1823, Michael Faraday had pioneered experiments in electromagnetism 2 years before and successfully built a rudimentary electric motor by wrapping metal wire around a magnet and passing an electric current around it, making the magnet spin. Charles Babbage and the Countess Ada Lovelace were yet to meet in 1833, who changed the way information was processed in a British society that was becoming more complex in its imperial expansion and administration, especially in relation to other imperial industrial military nation states such as Russia, France, or Germany. By the time of Mary Wollstonecraft's death in 1851, the mid-Victorian era had experienced an ascendancy of the first information age, known as the telegraph, a network of electric wires operated by electromechanical mechanisms which were used to send and receive personal messages, military orders, intelligence, and news across nations and across the globe. The infamous image of a giant figure of an armed Cecil Rhodes striding across the African continent, his arms outstretched, triumphantly laying out telegraph wires, subjecting the land and its people, are reminiscent of Wollstonecraft Shelley's fear for an imperial world obsessed by technology and conquest. For some, the history of the 19th century was a dark age before the digital age emerged in the mid-20th century. But Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley had lived in a time where technology was shaped by the complexities of imperial wars, social change, and new waves in artistic expression, such as photography and the emergence of the typewriter and advancements in medicine. Never could Mary Shelley Wollstonecraft have imagined the wonders of the Voyager space probe, smartphones, cochlear implants, organ transplants, the discovery of DNA, the creation of AI, and the World Wide Web. What would she have made of the Apollo moon landings, robots on Mars, or machines on Venus? The rise and success of the globalized cyber society built on a solid state digital networks exchanging information through fiber optic cables at near the speed of light or by radio waves in the air was itself shaped by the fear of the horrific power of nuclear weapons and the proxy wars of the 44-year-long era of the Cold War, which nearly brought an end to human life on Earth. The emergence of drone warfare and the meteoric rise of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, and Tim Cook would not have trusted her hope that humanity had not yet awoken from the futility of warfare and neo-industrial conquest. The dark satanic mills, as William Blake mentioned in his famous poem, Jerusalem, refers to the steam-powered factories that belched out the black-grey smoke and that would gradually steep the British industrial towns and cities of the 19th century into a miasma of disease and poverty. The emaciated but poor Caribbean workers, indentured Asian workers, and enslaved African-American plantation workers had fed raw cotton and sugar loaves into the coal-fed steam-powered factories worked by equally impoverished families of workers and artisans in the industrial north of England. At about that time, Mary Shelley had learned about galvanism, which was based on an 18th century scientific theory of bioelectricity at the time, which was that life is made up of animal electricity or electric current that resulted in life. Luigi Galvani, an 18th century professor of anatomy at Bologna, discovered bioelectricity from an accidental stimulation of a femoral nerve in a pair of frog's legs by one of his instruments at his laboratory. Mary's gruesome image of Galvani's back garden laboratory festooned with the twitching of these frogs hanging from metal hooks by their spinal cords was the inspiration for the darkest tones of Victor's obsession with the secrets of life, his lab stocked with dead or reanimated flesh. These descriptions of small, unfortunate creatures tortured with metal hooks and electricity in the name of scientific curiosity and experimentation fed into these dark images and plots, which would become part of the tone of cyberpunk, the neo-Gothic, or as we popularly say, science fiction, movies, comics, and novels. Authors, animators, and filmmakers such as Philip K. Dick, Octavia E. Butler, Musa Muna Shiro, who produced Ghost in the Shell, Kitsushiro Otomo, who created Akira, and James Cameron had created images inspired directly and indirectly from Mary Shelley's dark themes of scientific and technological process and the realm of body horror. Such fables would take us to dystopias populated by cyborgs, genetically modified humans and animals, virtual reality, robots, replicants, extraterrestrials, and AIs veiled as gods or demons, shaped by atomic warfare, social decline, advanced medicine, and space travel. Literary cyberpunk, as termed, was characterized by countercultural anti-heroes trapped in a dehumanized high-tech future. This popularity turned films and animations such as Terminator, Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell, Matrix, and Akira into status of modern science fiction icons. Cyberpunk has its deep origins inspired by the legacy of Newington Green Meeting House. Richard Price, Joseph Priestley, and Mary Wollstonecraft, in their human failings, became the anti-heroes, dissenters, who rebelled against the grand narrative and the degeneration of imperialism through their radical ideas against the dehumanizing dominance of a British empire that threatened the moral core of what they saw as an innate universal human suffrage. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, she named herself after the tragic death of Percy Shelley in 1822, became the first modern writer to make us beware of a future corrupted by an over-reliance on technology, authoritarianism, and scientific curiosity that was endemic without ethics or democratic oversight. Without Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and her novel Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus, there would be no Terminator, Blade Runner, or The Matrix. There would be no modern science fiction as we know it without us understanding how it could mold and not just our societies, but how it would form us as physical, sensual, and emotional human beings struggling against an unforgiving universe. Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you so much, David. That's the interesting speech. And interesting links between Mary Shelley and modernity. So any questions, anyone?
Thank you very much for that. You said that Mary Shelley lived to see the invention of the telegraph.
That's right.
Do you know what she thought of it?
Oh no. She was fascinated by. I think she was too sick by then because by the end she had died of a brain tumor.
Oh, okay.
So, I think she, despite the fact that she was surrounded by by founders of the Romantic movement, she was also critical of Enlightenment. So that combination of her mother's work, who was for the Enlightenment, and ironically, when she married Percy Shelley, much to her father's detriment, which also caused a rift between her and William Goodwin. I think all that knowledge and all that fascination with her mother's work had kind of given her a pragmatic view of the role that technology and science could have, but she was also aware that technology could one day take over the processes of nature as well. I mean, what's so amazing about her work is that it's so modern. So when you look at modern, I like go to the bookshop, and now they're talking about bioelectricity in cells now. You know, and the first chapter they mention Mary Shelley. And when you talk about other science fiction writers such as H.G. Wells, I mean, he died a year after the Second World War. And every time you talk about the history of military aviation, his name comes up. So this trend of science fiction was very much present in the mind, and she was also aware of the scientific progressions that was going on. Incidentally, her friend, Lord Byron, had a daughter called Ada Lovelace, and she's arguably said to be the first programmer as well. As you can see in one of the slides, she came up with the idea that one day that computer systems would be so advanced that everything living would become data. You could create a different world. It just through mathematics and just through the symbols that you used in computer language. But that didn't come about till, ironically, after this, during the Second World War with Alan Turing and the building of the Colossus computer, which, ironically, was the foundation of our own digital age. You know, so her books are very relevant to today because the technology was still shaped by warfare, especially the destructive warfare that we now will one day become a threat to our very existence as well.
Any other questions?
Thanks for your talk. It was really interesting. Did Shelley write anything explicitly about colonialism and imperialism?
Well, she did. She was an abolitionist, and she did write again. She did do a small article on the abolition of slavery, but by that time, in the British parts, the British role in enslavement was winding down, and the plantation system was now giving over to the factory system as well. But like I say, she was a mother, she was a wife, and I think it would have really been, not pointless, but it would have been ineffective because it was a winding down of that system anyway. And she was a writer as well, and she was writing other books as well. So curiously, she wrote a book called The Last Man, which is like a sort of the original survivor novel, you know, of, you know, and it's still relevant because we just been through the COVID epidemic as well. So she did write quite a few novels as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but The Last Man was a sort of another well-known but little-known novel that she wrote, that's sort of dystopian. It's basically about a man who's trying to survive after the world has been decimated by a plague. So, you know, I mean, she's 24, she's a 24-year-old woman, and it's amazing that at her age she sort of started a trend. I mean, everybody thinks that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas started that trend, but it goes back all the way back to Romanticism and back to the 19th century. So it's, you know, there should be another statue built of Mary Shelley because, you know, you know, if you like Terminator, if you like Ex Machina, if you like The Matrix, go to that statue. There's Mary Shelley.
Hi, yeah, thanks for me too. I just wonder, to some extent, culturally, things are coming full circle.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk has had many imitators.
Yeah.
There's atom punk, diesel punk,
Yeah,
etc. Either projecting a future,
Yeah.
or borrowing from past eras.
Mm-hmm.
And possibly the most popular of these is steampunk,
Yeah.
which is based on Victorian
Yeah.
technology, Victorian fashion. The Victorian era started only 2 decades after Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And it's interesting that the steampunkers overlap
Yeah.
very much with goth subculture today,
Yeah.
which seems to pull it all together. And a couple of examples of this, joint linked examples, is twice a year in Whitby in Yorkshire, all the goths will gather because Whitby was referenced in Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think they've been banned from the local churchyard because they kind of invaded the churchyard to get their photographs next to graves that were related to the Dracula story. But not very far down the road from Whitby is Howth, where the steampunkers gather every year for their national convention. And they chose Howth because of its association with the Bronte sisters, whose work is also has Gothic themes running through it. So it's strange that we seem to have recycled this culture through a series of subcultures, and we're almost back where we were. I find that interesting, but I welcome your comments on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's curious is, what's amazing is that in the beginning of the 19th century, you see a lot of British, they're quite small, but well-versed, well-literate British female circle of authors that actually, because of their own political engagement with British society, see the decline of British society from a rural base into an industrial base. So Elizabeth Gaskell, a well-known Unitarian, wrote famously North and South and Cranford, and that's about the observation of what an imperial industrial society is doing to ordinary people. So I mean, the Horace Walpole, I mean, despite the fact that, I mean, I've read it and it's quite operatic and it's, you know, a lot of supernatural and the crumbling of society. But what's amazing about these small but concise female authors is that they're looking towards the future, what will become of all of us with a world run by machinery. So I've actually gone, you know, when I was a kid, was raised in Hackney, and there was a sort of like, you know, there was a black culture and there was British culture, but now I'm revisiting it because you can't really explain British society without black culture. I mean, you know, with the Caribbean culture, because it's fundamentally what fed into the British society as well. And they were also fully aware of that as well. But steampunk, I tried reading into it, but for me, from a sort of a fictional kind of, it really misses the point, because the reason why we have come from like the steam power to the digital power is because there was an ever-increasing complication of an imperial world which was run by Imperial World, social society, and they needed ever more powerful machines to calculate the statistics that came from that. But there's so much that you can do with mechanical calculating devices, which is quite slow and still takes time, to something that's made of solid state, which is much faster. So there's some scholars who say that, ironically, 19th century was a dark age for the computer, but in actual fact, without that evolutionary pressures on technology, you wouldn't have laptops, smartphones, you wouldn't have the World Wide Web, you wouldn't have supercomputers, but that all came from research into electricity and into chemistry and things like that that developed in the 19th century as well. I hope that satisfies your answer, Simon. Okay,
Thanks,
the lady
David.
wanting
Just
to...
quickly, one last question from Joanna.
Thank you very much, David. I very much enjoyed Jeanette Winterson's Frankenstein. I was just wondering, which novel inspired by Frankenstein have you most enjoyed?
Ooh, I tell you what. You know what? I see so many science fiction movies, but the closest, I think, is Terminator. Because, I mean, the irony is that the director, James Cameron, actually was inspired to create the film from a nightmare he had. So it's a full circle. So, I mean, for me, the Terminator is an anti-hero because, I mean, he's not programmed to feel, he's just programmed to kill. And when you look at the film and when you see Big Arnie walking through a white suburban area, it never occurs to anybody that he looks different. He looks human. He's just like us because he's a reflection of us as well. But Kyle Reese, this human being who's had to survive the consequences of a nuclear war, is seen as different. He's arrested, he's treated as an outsider. So I liked that sort of full circle nod to the head of Frankenstein, because it's, the creature isn't bad. The creature is basically Mary Shelley, because this creature that's lost, it's not loved, and it's always trying to find its way in the world. It's not like the Warner Brothers thing that we all know about, but it's a creature that was produced out of negligence and rejection. So thanks for the question. Hope that satisfies your answer.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you. That was really interesting. David is our blog writer as well, so if you want to find out more about Mary Shelley and his other writings, please visit our website. Simon is also one of our blog writers. And again, if you want to write to our blog, please speak to them.